Hello and welcome to another episode of Steelfur Speaks. I'm Steelfur, London-based Flesh and Blood and other TCG content creator, making content now for about 5 years and Flesh and Blood since Crucible of War came out. So, a bit of a veteran at this point, played competitively, played at multiple Pro Tours, national championships, those kind of things. Never done too badly, never won anything major. But have made a bit of money off the game through just winning the right tournaments and the right promo cards every now and then. Probably spent quite a lot more traveling to events. You have probably seen one of my videos before. If you have not, I tend to do news of the day, focus, discussion content, so personal opinion, discussion content about things that are happening in the Flesh and Blood world, so decisions that LSS make, set design, and sort of decisions that are made on that front. The things that really interest me are design, balance, and sort of, commercial as well as business focused decisions that are made in the gaming space. So if you like hearing people talk about how things are designed and what we find interesting, then this is a channel for you. I also, just to plug my own work, am doing a bit of a writing project, which is basically a novel, but an online published novel set in the world of Wraith. I'm currently on chapter 5, writing chapter 6 at the moment. It features the tale of 3 heroes that are brought from around the world of Wraith into the land of Aria to help the people there fight a unknown threat that seems to be looming in the background. And that is on wraithfables.com, or you can find the audio version. Chapter 1 is currently out, with chapter 2 being edited, which takes a while, on this channel on a different playlist. Right, with that to do, this episode is dedicated to a card-by-card review of the set of Dusk to Dawn, which we now have fully available. We're going to start off with the Fabled, so the first card of the set, 000. The Fabled is Light of Sol, legendary. You can only have one in your deck. When this is pitched, reveal the top card of your deck. If it is yellow, you may put it into your soul. This is, I would rank this as kind of like one of the more playable Fables we've seen recently. If we think about the recent Fables we've had, starting with like Korshem, into Grandeur of Valhai, Blood of the Drakai. Those are not necessarily very playable Fables. The effect really isn't worth the amount of effort that it takes to have them in your deck. Blood of the Drakai just doesn't discount enough to make it worth pitching. Korshem just dies before it can really be worth playing. Grandeur of Valhai is quite nice, but it doesn't block in a deck that's really focused on blocking and Guardian, so it doesn't really fit the bill that you'd want. Plague Hive does kind of fit this sort of level of power, though. Plague Hive very much finding its place in decks that would play this kind of thing. So these, I would say this is roughly just a little bit worse than Plague Hive, because I think Plague Hive is, you're always going to get some sort of benefit, even if it's not necessarily the right poison that you want. You're probably still going to get one of the poisons you want. I find in most matchups 2 out of 3 of the poisons are effective in any given situation, and maybe 1 is only effective in certain situations. Whereas this, both heroes do need their soul, and there are some powerful moves you can make with this. Like, for example, in Prism, your new Prism, you're getting that Herald into your soul, which is going to then get you a Figment. And then if the Herald, assumedly you're pitching this to pay for a Herald, if that hits, you get a second Figment. Bolton charges in his soul faster, gets him to his Lumina turn faster, so it is desirable as well. I will say that this doesn't charge, so it's not as effective in Bolton. Like, if this charged the yellow card by default, this would be amazing in Bolton, but I also think it would potentially be too good, so I really do sort of understand why they've cut it out and not made it charge. And also I feel like it's balanced by the fact that in Prism right now, with all the blues, since we don't have Luminaris, old Luminaris, there isn't really as much of an incentive to run yellows in Prism as there is now in Bolton. So, it's much better, in my opinion, at the moment to be running, blue and red heralds, for maximum resources and maximum attack power, rather than running, the yellow ones, which are just sort of fall in the middle. So the only yellow cards you're going to be running are the auras and things like that, but your yellow hit rate, which this really relies on, will be diluted, so it is kind of balanced by that. So how would I really rate this? I'd probably give this like a 6 or a 7 out of 10. So it's good, but it's not like the best Fabled we've seen. It's not on the level of either Fidia or Heart of Fiendal. But, yellow is always going to be relevant to light heroes, and I imagine yellow will be relevant to Prism again in the future. And when it is, this card will again become relevant again. So moving on then, we've got 001 Prism. Currently, for lots of reasons, I've got a whole video on building these heroes. I think Prism is probably like a 6 out of 10. Well, no, okay, that's unfair. So in terms of design and interesting design elements, this is like 10 out of 10. It's thematic. It does something we haven't seen before where, a direct like card name hitting gets you another card type from your deck. And also in terms of like flexibility, it really matches things like Katsu and stuff like that, wherein it gives us that ability to search your deck for the exact figment that matches what you need on that turn, in the same way that Katsu can fetch the exact combo card that he needs on that specific turn. So I actually think, like, along those aspects, we're probably actually going to call Prism a 10 out of 10. I really like the design, I like the theme, I like the feel of it. Power-wise, that's a whole other discussion. 32 health is a massive penalty. I haven't yet seen anything that would indicate that that's a fair amount of a health penalty for her to have. But I could be wrong. I mean, I fully appreciate LSS are good at designing the game after 10 sets. So, we're going to leave it there. We need to start getting through cards quite quickly. Luminara Celestial Fury. This is target angel attack or angel attack action card with Herald in its name gets go again. It's expensive, but it does what it needs to do. You need to be able to attack twice with angels and heralds. You need something that lets it happen that isn't broken. I will say this is quite expensive to add on to the cost of any of the angel attacks or heralds. It means that to get 2 attacks, you need at minimum 4 resources on average. Plus the cost of the second attack you're going to do. So that does mean that using this ability is usually going to be a 2 blue or double resource pitch turn, which obviously means you're then at a case of you're playing, you're paying a lot of resources. Also the heralds, the angels, if you transform them on one turn, the odds you're going to have them on the next turn, I think at the moment are quite low. So, you're going to have to pay 2 to transform, 2 to get go again, and then that's 4 resources already, plus whatever you have to pay for the Herald. So I don't think this is the most superpowered. It's probably like a 6 out of 10, but I think it is also what the deck needs to work. I just wonder if it was worth making it this expensive. It would have been really nice if it had rounded out to 3 resources, so you could play it with like a Herald on a blue pitch, but maybe that was just too powerful in playtesting. Empyrean Rapture, don't need to say much about this. This is just really good synergy with the hero. It feels like this is really needed to make Prism's ability work. The downside being that you don't necessarily want to make a Herald the second you transform. You can kind of see the ideal play pattern is you come in with a Herald of Protection or a Herald, Wartune Herald. You hit, you give it go again, you get a Figment, you get an Angel, and then you attack, right? That's your ideal play pattern. But lots of people have 6 costs that are going to be blowing up the heralds. I like the threat this puts on the board, but I don't necessarily know how strong it is yet. So we have a lot to see then. But it's kind of like, I love the synergy between it and the hero. I like the fact that if that synergy is working and if this archetype is working, then this is much stronger than Tunic in terms of resources. So I would rate this card quite highly, but I think it is so dependent on her ability, her main ability working, that it does maybe lose a bit of points if they're, in matchups where that isn't working, or, if that angel focused ability doesn't actually come to fruition in a strong way, and Prism has to go back towards an Iris aura focused sort of gameplay strategy. The Figments are all do one thing and then do an angel. We can review these fairly easily. There's a whole discussion to be had about Ward 4 and the you know, the basically risks of Ward 4, because if they deal 1 damage to you, then your angel goes pop, right? So, you know, and how fragile these angels are. But let's not get into that now. Let's just rate them one at a time. So obviously Figment of Erudition is our 10 out of 10 angel, maybe even 11 out of 10. She's the best. She gets you a Ponder token, so she draws 1 card at the end of a turn when you make the Figment, and then when she attacks, she draws another 2 cards, which you can also use to fuel the weapon, because you know you'll have drawn them before you have to pay to get go again. Really good. Figment of Judgment is the banish one, turns banished cards face down. Really good into shadow cards, or maybe even Katsu if you can get it out at instant speed. Not particularly good into anyone else, so it's quite niche. Figment of Protection makes spectral shields, makes 2 more spectral shields. It's fantastic. You know, really can't get over how good that is. Arcane damage in small amounts is really good. So 8 Archangel of Ravages is kind of like 3rd on my list. I kind of go Erudition, Protection, and then probably either the one that brings stuff back or Ravages. Rebirth brings back a yellow action and then can bring back any yellow cards. So you can get back your angels and put them on top of your deck. It's really powerful, especially putting them on top of your deck and not like at the bottom of your deck makes this really strong. And then Dominate's interesting. I think this really just depends on how easy it is to combine this with something that you know that actually is going to hit, and how many poppers are floating around. Because on paper, giving your next Herald Dominate will get you another Figment, which then keeps the engine going. But in practice, we're kind of asking the question how many poppers are around, and whether this Angel Herald archetype is going to be viable. And if it is, then Dominate's good. And if it's not, then it's not. But still, good dragon, great art. Dragon. Sorry, it's not a dragon. Good angel, great art. Triumph, actually very useful. People, you know, have noted before the -1 is actually quite a big deal, because most people are playing 6 power. Even Brute tends to lean towards playing the yellow 6 power attacks over the red 7 power attacks, because they get resources and damage from that, rather than just damage and increased chance of bricking hands. So -1 actually very, very good. And of course, the fact that the Archangel of Triumph gives -1 until the start of your next turn also actually protects you from some of the attacking back, and sort of means that this could potentially, against say a go wide deck, equal a 7-point swing where you attack for 4 and you also give -3 on the counter attacks. So it could be really impactful. Figment of War gets you a Courage, so your next attack gets +1, and if you attack with it, you get +1. This, I think, is actually just the weakest of all the angels, but that's mostly based around the fact I don't expect the angels will be staying in play that much, and therefore the ability to give them +1 counters isn't going to be that effective. If we saw another card that let you protect angels, I would rank this higher, but as it is, I just don't see this being as impactful into the game. I think you will attack for 5 with her, and then that'll be it. She'll get destroyed, and you will have attacked for 5 once with 1 angel. So I think she might be the first one on the list to get cut, probably followed by Dominate, then followed maybe by Triumph or Ravages. No, sorry, it'll be Judgment first if you're not playing in Shadow, then it'll be Figment of War, then you'll probably go for Ravages or Triumph, or Tenacity, and then you'll probably have these 3 at least in your deck, and maybe you'll go like Erudition, Protection, Ravages, Triumph, and then Rebirth to bring them back, and then you might put the other ones in. Then we've got the Heralds reprinted in extended art, which is nice, brilliant. It's good to get non-foil versions of cards that are highly likely to Pringle. I myself have a giant stack of Heralds of Rebirth in rainbow foil in my cupboard that are very Pringly. One of the reasons I haven't given them out. The other reason, of course, that was Prism was banned, so it didn't really make sense to give them out. But it's good to see them getting reprinted, being a bit more accessible to people. Though it is kind of funny the amount of extended art and things like that Prism is getting in the set compared to other heroes, clearly reinforcing the idea that someone in LSS loves Illusionist and loves Illusionist extended art cards. Angelic Descent, this is really strong. If Heralds are strong, this card is amazing. At blue, you're going to get Go Again for free, so you don't need to worry about playing for the weapon, and you're going to get +1, which will bring, if we look at this, you'll see a lot of the angels at yellow are 6 power. it will make those 6 power angels come in at a break point, which is actually very, very useful for this kind of deck, because it lets the angels be more likely to hit if there isn't a popper. So, you know, even running the blue and using it to boost your 6 power angels up to 7, or running the yellow and using that to boost your 5 power angels, so a lot of the blues are 5 power, up to 7 for that break point, is going to be very impactful. You also then have Angelic Wrath, which again, you know, the +2 from the blue, making your 5s hit a break point, is really nice. Or the +4 from the red, which makes your, you know, 5 costs come in for 9, is really nice. So I really like those cards. And then I think those are really good. I think this gets like a 7 out of 10. It's hard to rank some of these cards when there isn't a huge amount of comparable things to them. So I can rank a Fabled out of 10, or rank the angels against each other. But these are just like specific use pieces, so I won't really rank these out of 10. But Celestial Reprimand is actually very, very interesting. I could see a world where an angel deck runs a lot of these. There is a huge problem, which is that they don't block. And there's a huge problem with a lot of these cards, is that they don't block, which means you're building a deck where the angels are your cards that you need to use to do attack damage, but they're also the cards that block the best. And you get into kind of a Ranger problem where, you know, or a Ranger and Runeblade problem, I should say, where the cards that block for you best are the cards that also you need to deal your damage. And you can't, you know, reasonably rely, you can't just block the whole game with your arrows or your attack actions, because then you don't have attacks to swing back and you're just left with a handful of instants. So traditionally, heroes that don't have cards that block have done a lot worse in the game, and the fact these are all instants that don't block is a bit of a worried flag. One of the reasons I feel like the Herald archetype might struggle a bit. But if you are playing in a meta where you need to get damage through and people are relying on popping your heralds, that's where Celestial Reprimand, maybe even as a rainbow or even as a blue and a yellow, does come in, and you can use that to get things through, because people aren't going to overblock your heralds, and if they do, that's fine, right? If we're imagining a situation where I'm attacking with a Wartune Herald and my opponent blocks for 6 because he's worried that I'll Celestial Reprimand and stop it being popped and he'll take 3 and I'll get a Herald in Arsenal, then that's fine. I Arsenal my Celestial Reprimand and I go to the next attack, right? That's fine. So, you know, it's not a problem if they start overblocking heralds. They probably won't, in which case you can use your combat tricks. The real question is, how do you get enough of these into the deck, given that they don't block, to actually kill people, you know, and deal enough damage, right? Because they can just start full blocking heralds if they need to. They will likely have more poppers than you have Celestial Reprimands. So, you know, you kind of got to work your way around this in a bit of a complicated way, right? Celestial Resolve, basically reinforce the attack, but for heralds is a really good card when it comes to defending. Again, we're talking about the fact that you want to block with as few heralds as possible, because those are your attack actions. So if this is in your hand and let you block with 1 herald, keep another herald to attack with, and then maybe you have Celestial Reprimand in Arsenal, that's quite good. So I think this is a decent card. Whether it ends up being played at red or blue, I don't really know. But you see, Prism got a lot of good tools. The real question mark is, how does this deck get built? The weapon is quite expensive, but we're kind of seeing that maybe the weapon is a backup for when you don't draw an Angelic Descent. So maybe you're playing Rainbow Angelic Descents, 1 or 2 colors of Celestial Reprimand, 1 color of Celestial Resolve, and 1 color of Angelic Wrath, and then you're just playing as many heralds as you can and all of the figments, and you completely cut an aura package, and that might work out. But, you know, that requires a lot of testing, and also we just have to face the fact there are a lot of heroes with a lot of poppers in the game that are quite popular. Vincent has them, Guardian is quite popular, Levia is going to be quite popular. So playing around all those poppers while also running tons of heralds and instants is going to make things quite difficult. So I'm not sure how that's going to work out, but we're going to have to see. Overall, I would say that, and I would rate the Prism section of this as good. Good but niche is what I would say about Prism in this set. If it works out, then these cards are fantastic. If it doesn't work out in the meta, then these cards really aren't working because they're so heavily focused on a theme. They're not generalist cards. They are really tied into making new Prism work. So we'll have to see how the balance works out around that. Moving on then to Bolton. Bolton, of course, unchanged. He has not hit Living Legend. So our first new card comes in at 0046, which is Beaming Blade. This is a 2 attack, 5 power if a yellow card has been put into your soul. And we will see that a lot of the cards that were given in this set do reward you for charging yellow cards. So there are lots of ways to charge a yellow card, use the yellow card to get go again, and then come in for 5 on 2 resources, which to me seems like a pretty good trade turn. It's not a huge turn in terms of damage compared to other heroes, but it's good for Bolton, and we'll see whether this sword gets played. Personally, I feel like Raiden is probably still your better choice because it's free. And one of the things we'll see with a lot of these cards is they are 0 for 3s that charge. And if you're going to go 0 for 3 charge, you're better off not pitching for the weapon. And you're better off attacking with a free weapon for 6 damage than pitching for the weapon to come in for 8 damage on the turn, right? In my opinion. So you're actually better off because it gives you more flexibility to block, right? So you're better off, I think, playing Raiden where you go in 0 for 3, charge, and then attack with Raiden for another 3, than you are going to be paying 2 for this. But I could be proved wrong. Bolton isn't my favourite hero, but I do feel like this sword is probably not as good as Bolton, just because it's a bit too expensive. We have Soulbound Resolve. Difficult fight in Bolton to play this because obviously a lot of Bolton builds still revolve around Luminous Ascension and Courage of... what's it called? Courage of... Anyway, Courage, the chest plate that gives your weapons -1 is actually essential for that build. But taking that out of context, if Bolton starts playing a non-Luminous Ascension focused build where he just attacks with, say, Raiden a couple times, this is quite good. You know, when you defend, you can charge. That gives you an ability to charge on your opponent's turn, and then if you charge, you prevent 1 damage. So this can block 3 damage and then another 2, so this can block 5 damage in the course of a game while also charging you cards into your soul. That does mean you can do less on your turn, but you know, if you don't have a way to set up, you know, it does accelerate you getting some cards into your soul, which gives you more flexibility to do things with those cards and with stuff like Beacon and Victory. So I do think it is quite good. And also 5 is a good number in terms of damage prevention from a chest piece. You know, it does require the getting rid of a card from your hand, but that is also in some ways resource generation, so it's not so terrible. And you could imagine a situation where you're using this and the new cards that say when this is charged do X to, you know, make a courage token for your next turn, make a quicken token for your next turn, block some rune chant damage, or even down here, you know, block for another 4 next, or, you know, get a resource to pay for something like an Oasis Respite, or pay for, you know, a different type of defense reaction like a Steel Blade Shunt. You know, so blocking with this, charging a banner at a Vigor, and then paying for a Steel Blade Shunt, for example, would actually be a really powerful defensive turn, which could see Soulbound Resolve be played. The art's also fantastic, so I think that's worth considering. Do you play it over Courage? It really depends if the... if this like yellow charge version takes over Luminous Ascension with sabers, but if it does, I think this will be the default chest for that that set rather than Courage, right? Because you'll be playing Raiden and it'll be cheap, and won't need you to break Courage to get weapons cheaper. All of these cards that charge to soul are all good, exception being Spellbane Aegis, but then I guess that's specifically to deal with arcane damage, and you know, if you need it, you need it. If you don't, it's on your sideboard. I just like the idea that these are making tokens when you charge them. I think that's very useful. It gives Bolton a bit more reward and resource for charging, which he always kind of needed. So I kind of rate them all. Some of them are clunky, like, you know, requiring a hit to get resource is a bit weird, because if you've already attacked and charged and hit, what are you spending that resource on? You know, are you planning your turn on having that resource? If you're not, then, what are you going to do with the resource? And if you are, then your opponent can just deny you. So it's a bit tricky. But it is, in general, I think this is a really good addition to Boltyn. I don't like the clunkiness of having to have a specific card in your hand to charge, or having to charge that specific card. But I think if you're going to charge, it's better if you get a reward for it rather than just charging and not getting anything from it. That's a pretty big deal. Then I'm kind of going to review these all together, just kind of quickly, but they're mostly 0 for 3, and they have an ability if you charge. This one is attack action from your graveyard on the top of your deck for every attack action card that hits this turn. So 0 for 3. This is quite powerful. Obviously, the ability to get back your best reds in the specific sequence you want for the next turn. If you can even hit 1 or 2 times, I think this is very powerful. I think this is really good, especially if your opponent, if you have a courage token, you can make this 4. You're forcing your opponent to block in weird ways to stop it. And obviously, if you can get back the best of your attack actions, I think this is really good. Spirit of War creates a courage token. I think courage tokens are amazing in Boltyn because they turn on his hero ability on any attack. Right, and we've seen already in testing, people are using courage tokens to give +1 to something like a command and conquer, right? Or a generic attack, and then getting go again by giving that generic attack +1 and banishing a card from your soul. And that's just huge, right? And also, something like a command and conquer with +1 that you can give go again, and also it has this gets +1 while defended by an attack action card, means they're very, very likely to hit. So courage is actually a really big token, and it's a really good card for Boltyn. Prayer of Bellona, your next attack action this turn gets +2. Okay, so a little pre-buff. Reveal the top card of your deck. If it's yellow, it goes into your hand, and then you charge your hero's soul. So this is actually huge because it's a free charge that comes with a buff. And it, draws the card into your hand, and you don't have to charge the card you drew. This is a really big payoff for a yellow deck matters, because it basically is a card draw and a free card in soul, as well as also buffing the attack you're going to play so that it automatically can be given go again by the card that you charged. Again, as I said before, using Prayer of Bellona with some really big generic and powerful attacks like Command and Conquer or something like Amnesia or Erase Face, or those niche like sort of targeted cards, makes this card much, much better, and can give those cards go again, and also works out because most of those are 2 cost. So this is kind of like 1 blue pitch can get you this, a charge, an attack with a CNC followed by a weapon, and then you've attacked for 11 with some disruption. I mean, that's really, really strong. So I think that's a really good card. Banner of Resilience, only really good with Soulbound Resolve, but the 2 together will block an extra damage, so that's really good. So I think you can prevent 6 with this by charging it, and then your next one is also going to block for 4, so you can kind of block 2, 5, 2, 3, and then another 4, so 7, which is pretty good, I think. The next time you hit gain 1 life, that's fine. Just an extra little bit of life gain chucked in on any of your attacks is fine. This one I've kind of already talked about, bit clunky in terms of what are you spending it on, and if you charge it, you're kind of telegraphing that you need a resource, which might make your opponent block. There are some mind games there, but I think that's a bit tricky. I think the Beaming Bravado is actually one of the better ones. So these have very interesting on hits, but what this says is I have go again by default, right? I get to a break point, I get to 4 attacks, so I can hit more likely, and I have go again by default with Boltyn's ability. So I think Beaming Bravado is actually really, really strong. And there's another one down here, I think, that gets +1 as well. No, Light the Way just gets go again, so that's all right. But I just like the fact this is a break point, so it threatens on hits if you're syncing it with any of these other cards. And it also gets go again from Boltyn by default, which I think a lot of his 0 for 3s were missing. So I think Beaming Bravado is really good, at least in red. You might play it in yellow, but only if you're going to buff it a different way. Blue, play it because it blocks and it can get go again, maybe. V for Valor I really like. I really like this again because of how it enables non-Boltyn cards to get go again with his hero ability. You spend 1, kind of like in the Prayer of Bellona kind of way. You spend 1, you charge the attack. You charge which, you know, gives you the soul to get go again, and then you also give the target attack +3, so you can buff, you know, something that isn't charging itself or getting a buff from itself with Boltyn, give it go again. And I think a blue as well, this is very impactful, right? Because ultimately you're going to play it and it's going to get +1. I will say that as a 2-block and as an aura, it's important to remember you have to put this into play on an off turn, and it doesn't block as well as the other cards in your deck, so you might not want it, but there are lull turns in games, especially if you're playing a hero that likes a bit of setup like Boltyn. So the idea that you're going to block, you know, with 3 cards, put this into play, and then use it in a couple turns later to set off a really powerful combo, like with a Beckoning Light or something like that, where you're making this come in for 6 and you're charging or something like that, you know, it does kind of make sense that this is quite interesting, you know. So if you line this up with the right things, I think this is a really powerful effect, but obviously it does require that setup, which does make it slightly weaker. Glaring Impact, I do not like Overpower. Let's just put it that way. I don't like the fact this is a 1 for 4. I don't really want to pay for it. I think it's just weaker compared to any of the other ones in this set. Overpower does have niches. It is quite powerful against certain heroes, and obviously 4 is a breakpoint, but I don't think I'd be rushing to put this into my deck because, as I've kind of pointed out, it's kind of better to not pitch where possible in this kind of deck so that you can have turns where you're charging with 1 card and then Raiden, you know, you're kind of not paying for things. But if this sword does end up being good, then 1 cost is perfectly fine to synergize with that. You know, so it would work out that you would play this, you would charge, and you would use the sword, you know, but you still have to get +1 from Boltyn somehow, which does make it a little tricky, right? So you have to wonder where your +1's coming from in that hand with this sort of setup, right? Like the way I quite like, just gets go again. Go again's really useful, you know, just for setting up stuff, especially if you're comboing it with Beckoning Light or something like that. One of the things is, I would like if more of these cards didn't require the charge to be on themselves. We've seen it in Boltyn previously where it wasn't just if you've charged this way, it was if you have charged this turn. I would have liked to see a few more of these just say, if you have charged a yellow card this turn, then you get a buff, because that gives you a bit more flexibility to use those as the secondary attack. Like, I love this. If say, for example, Light the Way just said, if a yellow card has been charged this turn, you know, it would be so much better as a follow-up to Beckoning Light or Spirit of War, because you wouldn't have to charge again. Whereas as it is, the only way to play Beckoning Light and then play this with Go Again is to charge a second yellow card from your hand, which means you're playing with a 4-card hand, which, as we've kind of learned, you know, if you're playing competitive Flesh and Blood, 4-card hands are actually quite rare, and Boltyn isn't the sort of hero that really gets to play with them that much, because, and it's a very simple reason, his 4-card hands often don't end up doing as much damage as other heroes' 4-card hands, so he loses the race. So an aggressive hero like, say, Fi or Katsu or, you know, Viserai or even Chain or someone like that could play with 4-card hands because they'd be presenting, you know, Lexi as well, they'd be presenting 20 damage. And that meant that if I play my 4-card hand and I present 20 damage, and you play your 4-card hand and you come in with a Beckoning Light and a V for Valor, I'm just going to take 6 damage, and I'm going to laugh at you, and then I'm going to send another 20 damage at your face, right? So you see where that problem is, that I would have loved if stuff like this, if just some of these, like maybe Glaring Impact, Light the Way, had just said, if a yellow card has been charged this turn, they get this bonus, because then they work well as a follow-up without requiring an additional charge, which can kind of cripple your hand size in Boltyn. And it's been the problem that Boltyn's faced since the start. Resounding Courage, yeah, courage tokens are really good. This is a really strong attack reaction. Again, I like it with Beaming Blade because it will give the buff that you need to your attack action, so you can banish the card to get Go Again. It has that line which says, if you've charged this turn, which again, we kind of said was really good and important. And, you know, the courage token as well means you can probably give the next attack Go Again. So playing this, for example, on a Beaming Bravado, then lets that come in for 6. You can give it Go Again. you get a courage token, you can then play Light the Way for 4, banish another card from Soul, and then you can come in with the weapon for 5. So that's a much better sort of turn, because you're going, you know, 6, 4, 5, right? Which is actually quite a decent turn. 15 damage, nothing to be scoffed at. The only thing, of course, to consider is having to pitch, having to charge. That is a 4-card hand, so it's a 16 damage 4-card hand, which again, as we've said, isn't really matching what other people can put forward. Charge of the Light Brigade, I like, again, for the same reason as this. It doesn't require charging, but it buffs you when you charge. This is a really nice card to put in front of one of these other, you know, if you've charged attacks, like Beckoning Light, because it provides the plus damage you need for Go Again, and also makes that attack more likely to hit. I think you're going to end up running quite a few Charge of the Light Brigades just to get the Go Again, and also to make your charge cards more impactful, which I think is really interesting, and that's quite an interesting thing to see. The Radiant equipment we'll just deal with together. Soul is really expensive in most of the light heroes that use it, and it's also an integral part of your end game plan. I certainly know from playing Prism a lot in the past that Soul was a very, very treasured resource in most matches, and you would never go down to low Soul if you could avoid it, and you would be turning it into Spectral Shields. Now, she has less ways to spend Soul because she doesn't have Spectral Shield generation anymore, but the Angels do require it, and also I think there are better ways to spend your Soul. There's also a question as to why this equipment is in a supplemental set. It really feels like it's draft equipment, but there's a whole other video on that out there called, you know, what's going on with Dusk to Dawn, which I highly recommend you to watch if you want rampant speculation about whether this set was designed as a draft set originally or not. That video should already be up, so I do encourage you all to watch it. Then we have, but yeah, so this is fine. It prevents 2 damage at the cost of 2 card resources. You know, it's good common equipment, I guess, for doing something, you know, but it does feel weird in a supplemental set. United We Stand, like, these tokens are good, but it blocks for 2. You know, 5 block and getting one of these tokens might be worth it to, you know, to play this card. Like, I know Bolton getting a Courage would be quite valuable. I think getting a Spectral Shield on Prism makes this block 6, but then you may as well just play any other card that blocks for 3. I think mostly the Warriors might end up playing this. Maybe Bravo for a Seismic Surge could be pretty huge. But, you know, I don't know if I'd see this being played anywhere else. I think the ones that either give plus attack or reduce cost are the best ones, and I think having those might make it justifiable to play this, but other than that, I mean, this is hints at a PvE card, but PvE isn't here yet. Luminal Lance is just fantastic. As an initial cost to play this, banish 3 cards from your hero's Soul. Again, we were talking about better ways to use Soul. Target light card gets +2. Target light attack gets with this hits, draw a card. Target light attack gets with this hits, it gets Go Again. This, more than anything else, is the attack reaction that I think will make Bolton super powerful, because the card draw is vital. The plus to damage, which lets you get Go Again, is vital, but you can also just get Go Again built in if you're not going to get the +2. So you kind of have a lot of flexibility there. I think this is fantastic. And also, if Prism is hitting, this is really good to use on Angels as well, letting you get some more card draw, you know, which lets you maybe then pay to get Go Again. Yeah, it's just fantastic, right? So I think Luminal Lance is stellar. This is probably going to be one of the standout Majestics from the set. Radiant Force Field, I've kind of already articulated that Soul is worth more than 1 damage. I just don't, like, this is an emergency card to save you from dying in a game you're already losing. But there's no way that in either Prism or Bolton you're going to have enough Soul that preventing 1 damage is going to be worth it. I could be wrong. There could be a Fatigue Prism deck out there, like we've seen before, that just uses their Soul to funnel into this. But I think you're generally going to see it being used to make Angels and make attacks with Angels instead. The next few cards we're kind of going to go through because they're quite quick. They feel kind of like draft cards in a way. They're tech cards in a sense. Later Rest I actually think is quite decent. I think it synergizes well, and at 1 cost and hitting a breakpoint, it's quite good. If Shadow Heroes are powerful, then this is a powerful card, and I think that's important as an option to maintain. I think it's good for I think it's good for there to be good cards that target each of the talents, just to make it an option if those talents become too strong. And I think a 1 for 6 that can potentially turn something they have in their banished zone face down that they were looking forward to replay. And then a lot of people are going to be like, well, this is only good against Vincent, right? And it's not good against Levia. But remember that Levia likes to cycle things like Ghostly Visit, Howl from Beyond, etc. And turning those face down will stop her taking a blood debt, but it will also stop her having a free card in her hand, essentially, like she often does with that. Play the 4 cost, it hits a break point. That's quite good. It blocks for 3. It's a decent card if Shadow Heroes are good. Blessing of Salvation is basically a sigil that blocks for 2. But if you've put something in your soul, you can play it as an instant. I think this card is fine. I don't like the 1 cost, but I think gaining life is super powerful. And the fact that it blocks for 2 means that it's even kind of in some ways more flexible than Sigil. But Sigil being free is kind of better. You know, there's pros and cons. Again, like this card, I think there's potential for a bit of a fatigue game plan that gains some life off this, but I don't know how strong it actually will end up being in Constructed. Cleansing Light costs 3 to destroy a red aura, yellow aura, or blue aura. I just don't know. Like, this is anti-Prism tech in Prism. I guess this is anti... You know, I guess you could use this against Vincent to destroy, like, you know, invocations of rune chants and things like that, but it just feels like a very techie card that's not going to see much play. Blistering Assault's a 2 for 5 that blocks 2. Yeah, it can get go again, but I just don't see it seeing much play. Defender of Daybreak, quite interesting as a 0 for 4. I quite like that. And then non-equipment light cards get +1 this combat chain. So if Vincent is going like super wide with like loads of Runeblade cards, then suddenly this becomes block 2. Then it could be block 3, block 4. It does buff itself, so it will block 3 against a shadow attack, and then your next light card could block 4, and then you could block another 4. So this could end up blocking like 5 against the right deck. So it kind of has echoes of Impenetrable Belief, which got played by light heroes into Shadow Runeblades. So that's kind of interesting. And also as a 0 for 4, it's not even that bad as an attack if you end up having to play it. So I find that's quite interesting. And the blue, you know, 0 for 2, whatever. But as a blocker against go wide shadow decks, it's actually quite interesting. So I don't dislike that card. Searing Ray is a 1 for 6 if you pitch a yellow. That's interesting, I think. It feels like filler, but it's interesting. Break of Dawn is a 0 for 4, preventing shadow damage, which again, I mean, that's quite interesting, right? Because against shadow heroes, it's basically defense reaction, 0 for 4, and it can prevent something that does arcane or something that's got dominate. I think that actually might end up seeing play if, you know, the light versus shadow matchup isn't very good. And, you know, you could see a lot of damage being presented by someone like Levia, which Prism might have to deal with, and you might end up running Break of Dawn just to deal with some cheeky dominate or something like that that comes through. So I think that's quite interesting. Sorry, that one crept up on me, but I think that's quite interesting. I could see Break of Dawn maybe in red taking the place of a defense reaction, but only if the shadow matchup is terrible for light heroes, which it could be. It very much could be, but otherwise you're probably going to end up playing, you know, Reinforce the Attack, or, you know, your Fate for Scenes and your Sink Belows instead, but it's a viable option. Moving on then to Levia. So Levia is probably gets the badge of most changed hero, mostly to do with the demi hero that we'll get on to later. But she hasn't been changed. Her hero ability is still the same, but she has a lot more tools to deal with her hero ability. First on that list, of course, is Hellhammer, the 2 attack for 6 when it attacks. If it attacked, banish it. This is essentially a get out of jail free clause to turn off blood debt when you need to. Is this good? Some people are hating on it because they prefer, you know, Mandible Claws and that go again style of gameplay in Levia. But I think, for one thing, that there's a lot more focus on attack actions in Levia, And I'm hoping that there's only one turn or so that you need to turn off Blood Debt with the new anti-Blood Debt heroes that you have, right? So in the situation of a game where there's literally only one turn where you need to turn off Blood Debt, and most of your attack is done with attack actions instead of your weapon, this is actually really good because it can save you on the turn that you need it. So I actually think this is a really good weapon, and I do actually expect to see it played. Because I think people want that get out of jail free card with Levia, and I think that itself is a vital choice to be able to make. And also it's a 2 for 6, which is kind of powerful. So I think that's quite good. And also I just don't see Levia going for as much of the go again mechanics. Spoiled Skull, banish this, target 3 action cards with different names of your banish zone and choose one at random. You may play it this turn, go again. It's one cost that lets you get back an attack action, one of your best 3 reds in your banished zone. And if it's a 2 cost or has something like go again, like a Ram Raider or something like that, or maybe it's a 2 cost like a Dread Screamer or something like that, you could have a lot of power coming through with this just for 1 blue. I think this is really good. I like the recursion in sort of like a very brute way. Diabolic Offering is a 1 for 6 that's a blue. Could be quite good. Can block for 6 as well in the right circumstances, which is very interesting. I actually think Diabolic Offering is quite good. It could also be a bit janky, like you don't want this to be the only card left in your hand, but I think it has some potential. And I think the fact that it costs 1 and is a blue with the potential to either attack for 6 or block for 6 makes it very interesting. I think that will be included in Levia decks. The Death Hydra is a 6 for 13 that I think is absolutely brilliant. Right, now 6 for 13, again, we were talking about Bolton in terms of rates and things. Other decks can do a lot more damage for 13. What other decks can't do is play this from the banished zone and play this without setup, right? So this can go into your arsenal, right, and then you can play it. And then you can play something else that banishes it again into your banished zone. And then you can use the new Levia heroes that we'll get to at the bottom. They are in here somewhere, aren't they? They are. They're down here. We'll get to in the bottom. You can use the other side of this to play it again off any 2 blues, right? So that's kind of huge. So the fact is that you might actually get to play this once, no, 2 times in a game. Then it starts to become good. Right, your opponent has to do enough damage to take your entire hand. If they don't take your entire hand, you're going to throw a 13 at them, right? That's assuming you don't have another buff or something like, you know, it's going to give it more damage, right? So I actually think Shaden Death Hydra is really good, and I think it's a really exciting card. I think people are going to be wanting to make this work, and I think it is going to be a satisfying payoff. So I'm really excited to see how that works. You know, I think this card is brilliant. I think the fact that it combos with things that let you play it from the banished zone just makes it really interesting. You know, you're probably not going to end up playing 3 of them, but maybe you'll play 2. You can get it into your graveyard just by blocking and then banish it from your graveyard with all the tricks that she has, and then find a way to play it from your banished zone, or get it into your arsenal and just attack for 13. You know, you obviously don't want to do it too early. You don't want to take the damage from the Blood Debt. But late game, I think this is a massive closer card for turns where your opponent isn't putting as much pressure on you. And if you're managing your life right, I think this can be a really powerful card. Slithering Shadowbead is amazing. There are loads of cards in this set that banish cards from your hand as an additional cost. And this basically completely ignores that and says, hey, I'm a 1 cost 6 that you can play from your banished zone. So your ideal gameplay is pitch a blue with a Shadowpeed in hand, Ram Raider comes in for 6, and then you Shadowpeed for another 6. That's a 12 with go again from 3 cards. That's pretty decent, right? You know, I quite like it. Expendable Limbs. As initial cost to play this, banish a random card from your hand. So again, if you banished a Shadowpeed, you'd be pretty excited. You may play it from your banished zone during your next action phase, right? So that actually lets you set up something like a Shaden Death Hydra in your banished zone for next turn. And it's a defense reaction. So that's pretty exciting. Like you could block for 6, or you could block for 4, banish a card, and then you're also getting that. So it's a blue 4-block defense reaction with a bit of a drawback, but also not something that necessarily is entirely a drawback. So it could also let you play something powerful, right? And also, remember, if you combo with something like Diabolic Offering, you banish a 6 and then you block for another 6. So you can block 10 and then play the card next turn, maybe, with the card you have left in your hand, right? So you've got 4 cards in hand. Maybe this is an arsenal. You play this, you banish something random, hopefully not a Diabolic Offering. You block with Diabolic Offering, block 10, and then you pitch the other card to play the card you blocked, you banished next turn, right? You know, and then there's powerful ways to do things there. Blood Dripping Frenzy, just really exciting. You know, banish your hand, put it in your arsenal, banish 3 cards, and then you get +3 attack and 3 cards in your hand, plus all of the enablers. Like if you banish Slithering Shadowpede, you can play it. If you banish, you know, it turns off Levia, it turns on Diabolic Offering and gives it +3. You know, and then if you have the right cards to set up a combo, you can get Go Again and you can do tons of damage. I really think this is an amazing card. I think lots of people are going to be setting up ways to build around it. Ram Raver's kind of like your staple Go Again card. People are going to be playing this definitely in red, potentially a full like rainbow playset of this, like we saw with Dread Screamer. The which is better, I don't know yet. Warbreaker gives overpower again. Not super keen on overpower, but if it's going to happen, it should be on a 6-power attack. So I don't know whether that's any good yet, but it's a 2 for 6. It's kind of okay. Shade and Scream is really cool because it can buff weapons and other shadow attacks. So there is definitely a deck I've seen people working on already, which is focused on swinging with the weapon every turn. So blocking, Shade and Scream banishes an attack, then you swing with the weapon for 9. You know, I think that's a pretty good line. I think these kind of buffs are very powerful. I think the problem is that to play these effectively, you almost need to have the attack action card you want buffed in your arsenal so you don't accidentally banish it, but then you still might accidentally banish the card you need to pitch to play for that card. So it can be a bit risky, which I think might put people off playing this card, but I still think it's kind of interesting. Battlefield Breaker comes in as a 3 for 8. Seems kind of nice to me. It doesn't banish itself, so it's a bit of a finisher card, so maybe it's not as powerful, and it does cost 3. So I think you're probably going to end up playing a lot more of the cards that actually banish for a positive effect, rather than necessarily this, which is more expensive. But it is an option for finishing off turns if you've got spare resources. You know, playing a Ram Raider into a Battlefield Breaker is 14 damage, which is nothing to sneeze at. Shade and Swing is a 1 for 7. Additional cost, fine, but playing for a 1 for 7, that's fine. No one's gonna complain about that. The annoying thing is that to combine it with like a Ram Raider, you do have to have 2 other cards in your hand, and you have to not banish this when you play the Ram Raider. So it does combo better with Dread Screamer in my opinion, but it's likely you're going to be playing 9 Dread Screamer in the deck and 3 Ram Raider, or 9 Ram Raider maybe. So this combos very well with Dread Screamer, which kind of gives you the ability to, you know, attack with this card, and also attacks quite well by itself because you can pitch any red to swing with it. So I think that's actually quite a good card. It's another yellow 6 power, which is quite good. Tribute to Demolition is a 2 for 8. I think that's pretty decent. I think it's better than Tribute to the Legions of Doom, which is 2 for 9. I think 2 for 8 is much better in that situation. The fact that the 8 is enabled by its own ability is quite good, so I could expect to see this played in red and maybe this played in yellow if you need it that way. But all in all, I think there's going to be something very careful going on here, where you have to be very careful how many of your cards are the old Levia cards that banish stuff from the graveyard, and how many of those are things that banish from hand. I feel like you probably only want to play the best ones that banish from hand, more of the ones that banish a single card from your graveyard, because that lets you control your graveyard very carefully, where you're banishing from hand a lot of the time, but every so often you are banishing from the graveyard, which mostly lets you control what's in your graveyard, which then lets you recycle specific cards like the Ghostly Visits, the Howl from Beyonds from your graveyard more often. And also lets you return stuff like Shade and Death Hydra and key reds that you're going to want to play later when you transform into Levia Consumed in your banished zone, right? It's important just to look at Levia Redeemed and Levia Consumed. In my mind, you're always trying to aim for Levia Consumed because it lets you play cards from your Blood Debt zone to finish off the game. Now, I will say the problem, of course, is that it also decks you, so you do have to be very careful. But you, yeah, you know, so you do have to be very careful. But I feel like if you're close to winning the game, you want to go to Levia Consumed, and you want to get back those Shade and Death Hydras and things like that. And if you're not close to winning the game, you want to go for Levia Redeemed, because it just turns off Blood Debt, right? So it kind of depends how many cards you've got left in your deck. If you're running low on your deck anyway, and you think you're close to winning, you go for Levia Consumed. If you don't think you're close to winning, you go for Levia Redeemed. When you're less than 8 health, you heal some health, and of course you lose Blood Debt, right? And we'll see, I think we'll see which one of these is better in the long run, but I think they both have pros and cons, and I'm kind of excited to see where these go, right? So I think that's very interesting. Vinset, Iron Maiden, banish a card from your hand if you do make a Rune Chant token. Whenever you play a Shadow non-attack action, you may pay 1 if you do the next Rune Chant effect. There will be deals damage can't be prevented. That means if you do this 40 times, you get 40 free damage. That's worth noting, which should kill any hero in the game. But that, of course, means you have to play 40 non-attack actions and pay 40 life yourself, which you're obviously not going to do. Flail of Agony, I think, is great. You spend 1 life. When it hits, you make a Rune Chant token. There's loads of stuff in this deck that gets turned on from spending 1 life. I think the issue I would say with this is that it doesn't have Go Again, so it kind of is hard to weave in there. But really what's going to happen is you're going to play one of these cards that says when the combat chain closes, each hero has lost 1 life, banish the turn. You're going to give this Go Again through Moravian Skies or Shadow Puppetry or some other Go Again effect that we have, and then you're going to attack with the flail to end the turn. If they let it hit, you get a Rune Chant token. If they let it hit, you get... And even if they don't let it hit, you get the effect of the life loss from you and your opponent's card, you know, on them. So you can, you know, swing with Widespread Annihilation, lose a life, banish a card from your hand for next turn, or assumedly they're not going to block Flail of Agony every time because it's only coming in for 1. And late game, this starts to be a very, very powerful chip effect. I think this is really good. Grimoire of the Haunt, getting an Eloquence token is huge. There are so many good Runeblade non-attack actions like Read the Runes that don't have Go Again. Getting an Eloquence token is huge. Also, it's worth noting, getting an Eloquence token is huge when you have stuff like Funeral Moon and Requiem for the Damned. These don't have Go Again, but an Eloquence token can give them Go Again, right? And if you give them Go Again and you can play them as an instant, then you can actually use them to get Go Again. So doing something like Shadow Puppetry into Widespread Annihilation, attack with a Flail of Agony, lose 1 life. Instant, banish the Grimoire, right? Play Funeral Moon, get another Rune Chant token, get Go Again because of the Eloquence token, and then attack with another attack, like Widespread Ruin. If the Flail of Agony hit, you got a Rune Chant, right? You could even potentially, there's one here, Deathly Wail makes Rune Chant tokens. So if you close the chain after attacking with Flail of Agony, you're going to get at minimum 1 Rune Chant token. Then if you play Funeral Moon, you're going to get a second one, which then lets you play, you know, one of these 2-cost Runegate cards and come in for another 2 Rune Chants and another 6 or 7 damage, right? So that's a really powerful turn enabled by Grimoire or any of the other cards like, say, Requiem for the Damned, which makes an Eloquence token, right? Now, this one requires a bit more sort of work because you have to make the Eloquence token and then use the Eloquence token to give Go Again to Funeral Moon to do the same thing, but it is still there as an interesting option. Widespread Annihilation, I think, is good. It's very good. You're probably playing this when you don't have cards left in your hand, or you have cards in your hand that you're willing to banish. Really what it's saying is if your opponent loses 1 life, which they will do because your Rune Chants aren't preventable, you have to banish a card from their hand, so it forces them to block more. I think this is really strong. I think you're going to want to play it. I think the only issue with this is that it has Runegate 4, which we're seeing might be a bit difficult for Vincent to get to. So I think Runegate 4 is going to be tricky. You might end up needing to play this hardcast it, which will be a bit tricky as well. Or just make sure you're setting up for this with something that makes Rune Chants and gets you there, like a Invocation or Read the Runes. So like if you play a Read the Runes and then next turn you play Widespread Annihilation, or you get an Eloquence token, play Read the Runes and then use this, I think that's all like good options, but I think Runegate 4 is going to be quite tricky, which is balanced by the power of this card, right? Widespread Destruction, each hero's lost life banishes a card from their arsenal. You can use this to clear out your arsenal, to banish a card you actually want in the banished zone from your arsenal. It's always going to hurt your opponent. So I think this is really good as well. Again, Runegate 3 seems to be tricky, but not too difficult. Runegate 2 seems to be quite easy. So it's quite interesting to see how good that's going to be to play. This is basically card draw for you, while also risking punishing one of your opponent's key cards. So this is really good. Widespread Ruins, really good. Definitely running 3 of those. Funeral Moon makes a Rune Chant token at instant speed. Combos really well with Eloquence tokens, so it's really good. Requiem for the Damned makes an Eloquence token, which is really good. We've already kind of showed you with the non-attack actions. So I think there are great combos to be done with these cards that aren't fully explored. Oblivion is really good. This is the one that turns into Narseth, the Soul Harrower, who hopefully is around here somewhere. Here we go. Who's a 0 attack. Can't really get go again very easily. But, you know, comes in for 6. The beautiful thing about Narseth that I think is really important to remember, and it combos well with Oblivion, is that he doesn't trigger your rune chants when he attacks. So you make him with 6 rune chants, he's not actually going to eat those, so you can use those rune chants another day. So one of the things you can do is set up like a bigger rune chant turn where you're playing stuff like Read the Runes or Invocation or Blessing of the Blessing that brings rune chants. And you can use those, but still not take a turn off attacking your opponent, because you play those and then you play Nazareth, and then you swing with Nazareth for 6, while also keeping your huge number of rune chants for next turn, right? So you're kind of like double threatening on that. One thing I will say is it feels like this is going to be difficult to do for the typical Nazareth, typical Vincent deck, because I feel like most of them are going to cap out at making 3 rune chants on an average turn. So it's kind of a question as to when you're going to get up to 6, right? Does it require you to revel in Rune Blood, or are you going to have to play something like Read the Runes and focus on taking a turn off to play Nazareth? Or are you just not going to play it and just focus on going with your 2 for 5s or your 2 for 7s or those kind of things, right? That's tricky. Deathly Delight gains you 2 life, which is pretty cool. I think that's really nice. And also it's a 2 Runegate card, so it's much easier to play. I could see people playing that a lot, just as a bit of a life gain to counteract the Blood Debt, while also being easy to come into for 2 for 5. Even as a 2 for 3, it still gains you 2 life, so it's kind of working as a 2 for 5. I think Deathly Wail is vital because it gives you rune chants. Again, as I say, if you go Deathly Wail with Go Again from Moravian Skies or something into a Flail, then you've lost a life, your opponent's lost a life, so you gain 2 rune chants, which means next turn you can play something with 3 Runegate again, which I think is huge. So I think this is going to be a staple even as a 3 for 4. Envelop in Darkness gets you a 2nd rune chant and buffs your rune gates. This is brilliant. Also, you know, the rune gates are free typically, so you could go, you know, make a rune chant with this, combine it with the rune chant you made for banishing something like a Deathly Wail at the start of the turn, or even like a Phantom Banshee. You could play that Phantom Banshee then for 10 plus the rune chants for free. And if you had a way to give it Go Again, you might, you know, find a way to play something like a Deathly Delight with the 2 spare resources you have. Or you're running Tunic and you just play this off Tunic and then swing in. But I think obviously most matches Shadow Runeblades are probably going to be playing Carrion Husk for the extra life. But I think Envelop in Darkness as a key rune chant generator and a way to trigger life loss is pretty huge. Rift Skitter I don't like as much because it's a 3 for 4. The built-in Go Again is great, and it does kind of synergize quite well with, you know, imagining stuff like Envelop in Darkness into Rift Skitter, into Revel in Runeblood, into a big, you know, Phantom Banshee or something. That's a good turn. So I think this will work quite well with, you know, those go wide setup decks, but I'm not really such a big fan of it. I prefer the things like Phantom Banshee just coming in for 7 is fantastic. Phantom Wraith coming in as a 2 for 6 is fantastic. I think Putrid Stirrings is amazing. We've already seen, these are just vanilla, so I'm not focusing on them that much. Putrid Stirrings as a 3 for +5 is brilliant. The fact that you can play it from your banished zone is huge, because you can banish it to get a rune chant, then pitch for it, which lets you kind of enable Runegate, plus plus giving that bonus to the Runegate card. So I think this is really good. It kind of gives echoes from Howl from Beyond, where you're banishing it for an effect, but also still getting bonuses from the fact that it's in your banish zone. So I think that's really good. Might play the blue as a +3. I think that's really solid. The red as a +5, really solid. Yeah, Shroud of Darkness, kind of the same thing here as the light cards. It's just not really that worth it. You know, you're going to prevent 2 damage. Unless you save this to the very last turn of the game, you're actually not preventing 2, you're preventing 1. Or unless you block a really powerful on hit, those are the only ways these are good. But shadow cards, shadow heroes have so much armor on their equipment. I don't really see where these fit in, except as kind of like a cheap option for new players, which is, you know, that is fine. But they're quickly going to want to upgrade these for something that actually blocks for 2 quickly. Dabble in Darkness is 0 for 5. Probably in the right deck, coming in as a 0 for 4. That's pretty decent, right? I mean, it blocks 3. A 0 for 4 that blocks 3 is not terrible. Yeah, let's leave it that way. Chains of Mephistis. This is a tricky one. When you play this from your banish zone, so you can play this from your banish zone. If you do, it enters arena with a doom counter. At the start of your turn, destroy this unless you remove a doom counter. So if you play it from banish, you get 2 doom counters. If a hero would draw a card during an action phase, instead they banish the top card of their deck and may play it this turn. This is a really, really good silver bullet against decks that are trying to draw a lot of cards, right? So something like Briar, Royal Briar, any of the decks playing Cash In, you know, any of the decks like Katsu who want mask triggers and things like that. It basically says you can't play those cards for the next 2 turns. And if I draw cards, I just get banished, right? So I think this is actually really powerful. It's kind of like a 2-turn lockout on card draw, except on your side, you get to banish the cards and maybe play them. So I think Chains of Mephistis, very good silver bullet card to target card draw in matchups. I think if you're struggling with Briar or against Katsu or other, you know, Prism with Tomes of Divinity and those kind of things, you're just going to play Chains and it's going to be brilliant, right, to stop them doing that on those turns. Dimensional Vortex. Each hero banishes a card from their arsenal for 1. Against some heroes, this could be amazing. You banish this at the start of your turn. You get a rune chant, for example. Or you banish this with Dread Screamer from Levia and you just play it at the right time. It doesn't have go again, so you do need to dedicate some time to disrupting your opponent. But this is very powerful disruption, especially if, you know, you can see what's face up in their arsenal because it's Alexi or something like that. This could be really powerful. I wouldn't be surprised to see this see play. I think it is one of those cards that has a high ceiling, but also kind of like a high floor. So I'm not sure it will immediately be in decks, but I think people will see the power of it after a while. Hungry Demigon feels like a draft card. It's only good against light heroes, so probably not going to see that much play. It's a 2 for 6 that gets rid of soul, so it gets rid of resources, and can be played from the banish zone. So in light matchups, it's good, but it's not a silver bullet like we saw with, you know, with something like Later Rest. It's just not as much of a silver bullet. It gets rid of a soul, but it doesn't really, you know, they might have more soul available. So, you know, I'm not really sure if we like that as much. Grim Feast I find interesting. Again, in something like Levia, where you're cycling this card, I think it's quite interesting. Even in something like Vincent, just gaining 3 life to offset blood debt loss, I think is kind of interesting. But you have to use Go Again on this to get really, or use it as your last card. But, you know, on a turn where, like, you gave Go Again to a Runegate attack that came in for 10, and then you spent your last resource to play this from Banish to gain 3 life, I think that wouldn't be a problem. But I think something in like Levia cycling this, gaining 3 when she needs it, might be more interesting. Vile Inquisition banishes the top card of a deck. That can be good for fatigue or stuff like that, but I don't think it's that good. Unless someone is really trying to set up late game into a specific combo, I just don't think this is quite good. This is a 2 for 8 if they have cards in Soul. That's quite good against light cards, light heroes, but I think you're just going to want to play something that synergizes from within your class rather than this. This is actually a 2 for 6 with Go Again. Again, I think this is probably the best aggro card into light heroes. You know, they get a card in their Soul, and then you get Go Again on a 2 for 6. I think that's really powerful. If I was going to sideboard in something to make aggro into those decks a bit better, I would play Soul Cleaver over things we've seen so far. This is actually very good. Unlike the other cards, you know, that have, you know, limitations and stuff like that. I think this is really powerful. Just a 0 for +3 on any card you're going to play from your banished zone. I could see this slotting into some decks, maybe just as a little bit of an extra boost. The same with Tear Through the Portal. Like, it's tricky because you're not always going to be able to like guarantee the color of the thing you're targeting. But in something like Vincent, where most of the cards you're going to try and RuneGate through will be reds, having something like this could be powerful. To give Go Again, but I think this is kind of like a budget option. There's much better Go Again cards in Runeblade, and Levia finds it much harder to play cards from her banished zone. So I don't know how well this fits in, to be honest. Nazareth. We then got the Unity cards. They're all like good. This is good. This is an Earth Blue. Briar likes Earth Blues. The creation of an embodiment of Earth token means your next block is going to be really good. And that also means that this blocks for 3 because it's a non-attack action. So this is actually quite strong for a blocking turn. And I think these get destroyed at the beginning of your action phase. So it's not going to last beyond that turn, but it's still quite strong. I really like this card. It's a shame that Briar is going. It also combos quite nicely with Force of Nature because you can play Force of Nature, fuse with this, and then play this, which then buffs your next attack even more. So you can kind of play Force of Nature will buff the first attack you play, then you can play this and buff the second attack you play, and then kind of get a few more chances to draw cards. So I really like it. Northern Winds is... it was broken until they changed freeze, right? So they changed freeze to end at the end of turn, but originally it didn't. When it didn't, this would just freeze a card for the rest of the game, but they changed freeze smartly so that it just automatically ends at the end of the turn, or the start of your next turn, I think. But, you know, this is not particularly good. Being able to freeze an equipment, I guess, is all right to stop a bit of damage coming through. Spellbane Aegeus, not amazing. I will say that this is quite good into Briar, so, you know, block with this, make a Spellbane Aegis to block some rune chants, and then freeze their weapons so they can't... Well, you can't freeze weapons, can you? Nah, there you go, exactly. So you can't freeze weapons, so it says enough. We don't need to talk about that anymore. Call Down the Lightning. Lightning Lexi, not really that popular, but it does have a powerful effect in terms of whenever the defending hero adds 1 or more defending cards to this chain link, it deals 1 damage to them. There are lots of effects like, you know, Chilling Ice Vein and things like that that trigger on damage deal rather than on hit. So this actually will trigger those effects. So I think this is actually quite an interesting card for those, though it doesn't fuse with them, which is a bit tricky. But I would love to, like, you know, you flip this in Lexi, play it, and then you come in with like Chilling Ice Vein and a weapon, and if they block, and you know, an Endless Arrow or something, and if they block them, you still trigger Chilling Ice Vein, right? So this might just take the entire hand off your opponent, and then you can, you know, use that to thing. Or you can block and get free Go Again, which is pretty big on arrows as well. So actually I think Call Down the Lightning is quite interesting. Whether it's any good, I don't know. Rugged Roller's a joke. I don't even want to talk about it. The fact is you're already rolling dice, and if you're rolling dice in this game on Brute, you've basically lost. Because the dice roll cards are not good, and it's really frustrating. They keep giving Brute these rather than giving them actually new playable cards. It is a 1 for 6, big whoop. You may never end up actually getting to use this in a game, even if you play it, just because of how it works with the dice rolls. I really don't rate dice roll cards very high. I'm sorry. And I don't think that they don't see playing competitive for a reason. Scowling Flashback, I think this is amazing. This is when defends Intimidate. Some people were shitting on this because they get the card back, but you know, we've been talking about Briar, we've been talking about Vincent trying to set up combos with Rune Gates and Revel in Runebloods and stuff, and the fact is that this can disrupt someone's turn massively and delete setup, right, that they have. We've seen the power of Ice Attack in Oldhim. The power of Ice React in Oldhim is not that they, you know, that they can't, you know, they can't play the card ever. They do draw the card next turn, but it is that they can't play the card right then on that turn. It is that they can't combo, right? And that is vital. So I think this is actually brilliant for defending and getting Rhinar to the late game. Numbskull's a 2 for 6. and it can't be modified, which is actually quite interesting. It can't be shredded, can't be worked on by Blinding Beam or any of the new Herald tech we've seen. So this is actually quite interesting from a Prism perspective in terms of, you know, Figment of Tenacity doesn't reduce it. All these things are quite interesting, actually. Its cost also can't be increased, which I think is very interesting. So I think this is a very interesting tech card. I'm going to have to see how useful it is. But as a 2 for 6, it's all right. And I think the other thing is just quite resilient against changes, which I think is really interesting. Dig Up Dinner is actually really cool. You spend 1 to recur 3 of your best cards back into your deck and then gain 3 life. You know, assuming most of the cards in your graveyard are +3, this is really good. I think Levia really likes this as kind of like a way to get cards into her deck again. Bit of life gain. I think Rhinar really likes this as a way to keep his density of good 6 power cards up. I think this is a really good card. I expected to see some play. It's also a blue that blocks for 3, so I think this is really good. Starstruck is amazing. The Crush is amazing. When it deals 4 or more damage to a hero, the only things they can play are damage with base greater than the amount of damage dealt, so at least base attack 4 or more. So really good against rangers and against ninjas and things like that. Also, the ability to block and make a Seismic Surge token is huge. We've seen the power of the 4-cost attacks in Guardian, and the fact that this can just reduce the cost of one of those attacks by 1 is massive. I think Starstruck is huge. Decimator Great Axe, I love the art. I love the fact that it's an axe. I think it's too expensive for a 4-cost attack. I do like the fact that it halves the base power of defending cards. You know, defense reactions become 2, 3 becomes 2. This is going to hit a lot. I do think there is probably an axe deck somewhere in the works for Warrior. But, you know, a lot of the cards do say sword, so I'm not sure when we're going to get to that. But I think if there's going to be an axe, this is definitely better than the other axe that we got. So I think this is quite good. Bastion of Unity, where are the one-handed warrior attacks? Currently, you can only play this with a saber or a dagger. I think until that, you know, changes, we're not really going to get much excitement from this. I don't think warrior needs to block so badly in any of their games that they need this the way it is, but it is exciting to see a warrior shield. The art's fantastic. Ironsong Versus is just brilliant. You know, your next sword attack gets, when this hits, create a courage token. Courage tokens are really strong in Bolton. Dorinthia even likes them as well. I think this is going to be really strong in both of the warrior heroes, and it blocks for 2 with temper. I think this is brilliant. Is it better than the... what are they called? The chest is courage. The braces are... Anyway, the warrior braces, is it better than the legendary warrior braces that give +1 to your next weapon swing? Yes, I think it is, because it's a token that you can use next turn as well. So you can end with this and carry over the attack. It doesn't let your weapons break breakpoints, but I think that's fine because it just gives more of an on-hit to all of your weapon swings, which I think is really impactful. Chorus of Ironsong, Dawnblade gets +1, damage would deal can't be prevented. It's really nice against the rise of things like Peace of Mind and Oasis Respite that are in the game, as well as, of course, helping Dorinthia deal with Spectral Shields, which I think is really good. Also, blocking with this gives you a Courage token, which can be useful for attacking. I think this is really good for the Dorinthia Prism matchup, where she's traditionally struggled, helping her deal with Spectral Shields. So whether Spectral Shields and Angels are going to be a problem in the future, I don't know, but I actually really like this card. I will say that in terms of damage it gives you, 1 for +1 is not a good rate on a warrior attack reaction, but I think the blocking flexibility of this card might make up for it. Morlock Killer is one of my favourite cards in the set, just for theme. I love the way that Story links this into the game. It's obviously a blitz only card. It lets you banish your mentor from your hand or your arsenal to prevent lethal damage. I just think this is really good because Minerva sacrificed herself to save Dorinthia, and I think that theme captured a card like this so well, with an effect that I think could mean it sees play. 10 out of 10, amazing card. Really flavorful. I think going to be very useful for Blitz. Scepter of Pain, I love. Finally a way to deal damage with a weapon that does not spend your rune chance, which might bring OTK Viserai back, as he's a way to clear up Ashwings while saving up his Runechant tokens. You know, he still won't be able to deal with dragons, but you know, there's pros and cons. But I just like the idea this is putting threats on your opponent, even when you're playing Runechant focused turns. I wish it had Go Again, so it worked better with non-attack actions that generate Runechants, but you can't have everything. Dyed Carapace is fine. I don't know that you'd ever play this over just playing Tunic for resources or the Ether Iron Weath for resources. But it does have efficient Arcane Barrier, which is useful into some heroes. And it does block 2, so maybe it's good into the Runeblade Mirror and that kind of thing. Bequest the Vast Beyond, I think this is really good. It basically is Bloodsheath Skeleta, but to disenchant attacks. As well as being a non-attack action that triggers Viserai. I think you can use this to play some of the more expensive Viserai cards without pitching, which could give you a very effective, 2 or 3 card hand. So I quite like that. Runic Reckoning I quite love. It can be free. You're going to have Runechants. Gives you attack +3. Gives Go Again. And also importantly for Viserai, turns on that non-attack action clause, which lets your next attack generate a Runechant. And for Vincent, just gives your, lets your, next attack, it basically lets you bypass Runegate if you need to, right? So if you need to, you can play this for free when you have 1 Runechant, and then, oh no, sorry, I'm getting confused. I was thinking of the last card while I was still talking. This doesn't let you play anything for free, but it does, of course, just give you a bit more oomph on those attacks. Yeah, so that's quite good. Chiana, I don't really want to talk about, but we will. It is a 2 attack card that copies an attack action card from your opponent's hand. That could be really fun and really strong. It makes an Eloquence token on defense, which could be quite interesting in Ultimate Pit Fight, which is obviously it says any number of heroes control. So Ultimate Pit Fight could be where this finds a home. That would be really interesting to see. Refractor is basically like a once per turn Iris of Reality. Iris of Reality is really good because late game you can use 2 blues and 2 shields to attack for 8. This is better because it deals more damage for less resources, but I think personally a lot of people are going to go for the flexibility of being able to attack more than once over the 1 damage for 1 less resource. Maybe this would have been a consideration if there were more cards that queued off yellows in the set, but as it is, you can just play blues and play Iris rather than playing this, so I don't know what the value of this is. Diadem of Dream State is really interesting. Once per turn, when this or a non-token permanent you control with ward is destroyed, you may pay 1 if you do create a ponder token. This is really interesting, especially with like the Dream State gloves. So if those get blown up turn 0, you can make a ponder token that will trigger on your turn 1, which can be really, really valuable. It does become riskier the longer the game goes on. I mean, it's going to be tricky to keep this alive long enough to trigger it twice. But I think if you do trigger it twice, it has a huge effect on the game. So I actually could see this being played. It does block 2. It does draw cards. I think this is really nice, especially if you tie it to the, what they call wave gloves, the gloves of the wave of reality, the Runeblade gloves that have ward 1. I think that's just really interesting. And then, of course, if you keep it alive to the point where you get angels on the board, it's brilliant. Flicker Trick is a 0 for 5 defense reaction, really good into Ranger. It gets blown out of the water by attack reactions, but I really like it. I think it really could have a niche. It's kind of really a good read card. Like if you read they don't have an attack reaction, then this is an amazing block. If you read wrong, you take so much damage, but I think it's brilliant. Lost in Thought is complicated. 1, look at target hero's hand and choose an attack action. If you do, they put it on the bottom of your deck and they create a ponder token. You're really stripping resources out of your opponent's next turn, which if they've set up for something, like if Lexi has 2 cards in Arsenal and you can see one of them is like a face-up threat, you can look at their hand and just get rid of the blue. If they've got a blue arrow they need to pitch, you get rid of it. And then it doesn't matter if they have a ponder token, because suddenly their huge turn they were planning can't happen. And it has Go Again, and you can swing with a 2-power angel after this. I think this is a really strong card, and I think it has a very high ceiling that we're going to see good players using this very, very well. Crown of Providence, reprinted, good. Reprints are good. Of key generics are good. Frontline Helms, it seems like there's a whole Frontline series here. I've already seen the chess piece. I'm sure there's boots as well. These are fine. You know, you have to block with them on turn 1. They block for 2 on turn 1. That's quite high rate. Normally, it's not good because you want equipment to, you know, block on hits. But if, you know, overall life is just your goal, then you can just play the boots, because a lot of characters don't have good boot slots. Block for 2 on turn 0, on turn 1, and then, you know, it's the thing. Only if you're going, yeah, only if you're going second though. So if you're going first, you would take these off the table, because then you're just gonna get a -1 counter on them straight away. But it's all right. It's not good equipment. You're obviously going to play better, but one of the things we're always keen on is seeing equipment that fills the gaps. So then we've got Censor. 1 for 5. If it hits a hero, name a card they can't play, a name card. Blocks for 3. I mean, this is really good. Blocking for 3 is huge. Stopping people from playing a specific card, especially if, you know, they're telegraphing something or they've banished something face up, is really powerful. So I think this is really interesting. It'll be interesting to see if it gets used. Generic 1 for 5s don't often see play, but this is a very specific effect that might get it to see play. I think the next card is Mischievous Meeps. Gain control of an item with cost 2 or less, otherwise draw a card. So 1 for 2, it's really easy to block, so it's not that much of a threat. But obviously if you play it the right way, or you buff it the right way, and you hit like a dash or someone with it, this is kind of huge. Then we have Hack to Reality. This is actually huge as a +2. And the next time you hit a hero, destroy a non-token aura they control with cost less than or equal to the amount of damage dealt this way. This is really interesting because Prism has all those auras. And if you hit for 4, you can blow up one of them. And also it says the next time you hit a hero this turn, destroy a non-token aura they control with cost less. So you don't actually have to hit with the attack that you buff. So if you're going wide and Prism plays a blue aura that's a 0 cost, for example, you can just keep going wide, and at some point you'll deal 1 damage to them, and you'll just be able to eat their blue aura, whereas previously you had to attack that blue aura and lose go again from Spectra, right? So this is very, very, very interesting. I think heroes are going to get a lot of benefit out of this. Even someone like Bravo, who previously would have had to take a turn off to kill a blue aura, could potentially play this, an attack, and then maybe a pummel to get the damage through, and then just kill that blue aura without actually having to attack it with go again or something like that. So I think Hack to Reality is quite an interesting card to watch as well. We're almost done. Hold the Line. If an attacking hero has drawn 2 or more cards this turn, prevent the next 3 damage that we dealt. If your meta's full of royal decks that cash in, or tomes of Fiendal, or tomes of Divinity, or any of the tomes of Harvest, this is a 0 for 5 blue defense reaction that you should definitely be considering playing if you're blocking. Fantastic card, really interesting design space, really good way of countering those deck archetypes without being printing another generic defense reaction that's really good into everyone. I really like this design. Warmonger's Diplomacy is huge, right? Genuinely, this is one of the best Silver Bullet cards I think we've seen in this entire set, right? Because a lot of the heroes that we're seeing a lot of threat coming from, like Briar, Viserai, Vincent, even to a certain extent, someone like, Azalea or Lexi really loves playing non-attack actions and attack actions. And if you see that Alexi is setting up for a really big turn with like a 3 of a kind or something like Rain Razors face up in Arsenal, right? Playing a Warmonger's Diplomacy and saying, well, okay, are you using your weapon and your attack actions, or are you using your non-weapon, non-attack actions, can massively disrupt a lot of the setup turns in this game. Most setup turns do involve a non-attack, like unless you're against someone like Fi or something like that. Most setup turns do involve a non-attack action or that kind of thing. And even Fi will use something like an Art of War or something like that, which this turns off. So I actually think Warmonger's Diplomacy is a huge attack. The only, of course, drawback is that it doesn't have go again, but I think if you play this well with go again in your deck, someone could have a lot of defensive reach. Ooh, sorry. Ooh. Making me yawn. this could have a lot of defensive reach, so I'll be interested to see if that starts to see play. Poison the Well. The art on this is fantastic, isn't it? But Poison the Well, like, there are decks that play Sigil. If you have this in your hand when they play a Sigil, you feel like a god. I don't think there's any deck that has enough life gain to justify this card, but I really feel like if we're back into a control meta where people are playing sigils and things, and you run this as a one-of and just leave it in your arsenal until they sigil. Like, if a Dromite's trying to bait you with a sigil, you attack with a CNC, as maybe like a Guardian, you have this in your arsenal, and then they sigil, and you go, lol, lose the 3 life instead. You're going to feel like an absolute god. Probably not worth playing it, but if you could, it would feel fantastic. The tokens sort of speak for themselves. They're all really good. Even this is good in the right matchup. I think this is a fantastic set. I love the design. I love the fact that it's really beefing out 4 heroes instead of doing what previous supplemental sets have done, which is not really give good enough support to anyone. I feel like as long as none of these heroes are in the next draft set, everyone's going to feel fine about being left out of this. As long as we go and we pivot to, you know, buff up a different 3 heroes that aren't included in the set, everyone's going to feel great about it. And I really like the design on these heroes. I really like the fact that I can't look at them and immediately see what deck is better. I think we're going to have to play with these abilities and find out which of these cards actually work. I also like the fact that not all of them scream overpowered to me. I feel like, you know, there's a good range of power in this set as well, and it might be giving other heroes like Leviah, like Bolton, a chance to shine over, you know, just Prism being good again. I think this is a really exciting set. I hope you've enjoyed this review. If you disagree with me massively and want to yell at me about any of my reviews, or if there's any cards I haven't called out that you are excited for, please do reply in the comments. And as always, if you've listened to all of this video, give me a like and a subscribe, because I worked hard and you deserve to see my hard work more in the future. Thank you very much. I've been Steelfur. This has been Steelfur Speaks. I will speak to you all again very soon.